All right, there we go. We are recording now. And so I'm just going to turn my camera off because sometimes the computer does not want to act correctly with Zoom when I have my camera on. So I'm going to turn it off just to make sure that we don't have any technical difficulties today. All right. So my name is Chanel Jackson, and I am the Executive Director of Family Seven Families Region 7 here in Northwest Louisiana. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar, Embracing Neurodiversity, Bridging Clinical Insights and Everyday Support. This webinar is hosted by, of course, Family Seven Families Region 7 in partnership with the Bureau of Family Health. Family Seven Families Region 7 is one of 9 nonprofit resource centers in the Family Seven Families Network across Louisiana. And we serve the 9 parishes that make up Bienville, Bossier, Caddo, Claiborne, DeSoto, Natchitoches, Red River, Sabine, and Webster. And we're also known as East Texas, but we are Louisiana. So we provide support, information, and training to parents and caregivers of children, youth, and adults with disabilities or special health care needs, and through individual assistance, community outreach, education workshops like today, and webinars, we empower our families with the knowledge and the tools they need to navigate the system and advocate for their loved ones. So before we get started, I just wanted to go over some house rules today. I wanted to do a quick reminder for those of you who are requesting CE, continuing education credits. Um, those attendees must attend the entire event and complete the evaluation at the end in order to get those CEs. Also, when completing your evaluation, please be sure to indicate the type of CE you are requesting just to make sure that we can process that correctly. Also, we will be taking questions during the webinar. So we encourage you to put your questions in the chat. And if it's an important, relevant question to what Miss Walker is talking about at that moment, she will go ahead and address that question. If not, we will take questions at the end of the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and take this time right now to introduce today's presenter. She is Miss Donisa Walker. She is an educator with over 40 years of experience specializing in reading, dyslexia, and cognitive challenges. She is a board certified cognitive specialist, dyslexia and reading expert. She's a published author, and she is also the owner and director of Learning RX in Shreveport. And for those of you who don't know, Learning RX is a brain training center. And there she works with individuals to strengthen cognitive skills and improve their learning outcomes. And so today, Ms. Walker, she's going to share with us her valuable insight and understanding on neurodiversity and how clinical knowledge can translate to practical everyday support for individuals and their families. So please join me in welcoming Miss Donisa Walker.
Thank you for the beautiful introduction. I appreciate it. I am very excited to be here to share my passion with all of you. And I am super passionate about learning differences as someone who is from a family that has learning differences in our family and have embraced those and learned to benefit from those. I just feel like it's really important for us to understand about neurodiversity in our world and how much it brings about. So let me start with, again, just a little brief history. I spent 20 years in the public school systems and a little bit in the private sector of schools, and then opened Learning RX 18 years ago to begin training brains. And in the course of that time, have trained over 1,800 brains in that 18 years, as well as seeing many brains in for assessment. And I'm passionate in my belief that every single person on this planet should have a cognitive assessment and should know where their own strengths and weaknesses are so that they know how their own brain works. I have never met two brains that are exactly the same. And I think that is what neurodiversity is all about. So let's start there. I would like to start just sharing a little bit about what our goals are for today and just the experience. Again, we want this to be a really great, positive, interactive experience for everyone. And so if you will enter questions as I'm presenting into the chat, and Ms. Chanel will let me know that those are important questions to be answered as we go through. So first, we're going to start by understanding what neurodiversity is as natural variation. You will notice that I put into the chat what kind of car that you drive. And the reason why I put that in there is because we accept very easily that there are all kinds of different cars, and we accept very easily that there's probably no two cars that are exactly alike, even if they look alike. If we open the door, the driver has rearranged or added something or personalized it in some different way. It's something that we accept very readily that they come in different colors, they come in different sizes, they come in different brands. And it's something in our world that we embrace that diversity as a really great thing because my car is not your car and I love my car. And so I want you to kind of open up your brain today to kind of see that each brain is a unique and personalized brain or car, if you want to call it that way. And some of them run like race cars, and some of them run like clunkers and beaters that need a little upgrade for efficiency. But we all love our own cars, or we want to make some changes in them. We need to learn to love our own brains and decide whether we're going to embrace them in the area that they are, or whether we want to increase some efficiency. And we'll talk about those today. The other thing we want to do today that's really important is we want to clarify some key terms that we have, not only neurodiversity and understanding what that means, but also neurotypical, neurodivergent, neuroaffirming. There are so many different language changes now that we need to embrace that go across the medical, educational, and clinical settings. We also want to recognize the common challenge areas and triggers because this is no longer something that happens only in the classroom, but it's also in the workplace and it's becoming more common. And so we need to be really aware of how we can support people before this workshop was starting today. Ms. Chanel and I were talking about some unique types of neurodiversity that impact our lives. And so we'll share a little bit of that later on today about how we experience those across our lifetime. The last two things that we want to do is we want to learn to use supportive strength-based language and to apply practical supports across the home, school, and clinic, that environment that we're in, as well as any workplace. Okay, all right. So we're going to start with quick definitions. I'm going to call it the 1-minute version because this is just for us to understand what these definitions are and kind of just embrace. Neuro, of course, associated with the brain or nerves, from the definition of that word. Neurodiversity, diversity meaning difference. And so when you hear the word neurodiversity, this includes everyone. This is all brain types, just like we say car. When we say car, we mean all cars. We mean trucks, we mean cars, we mean motorcycles. When we say car, it's a big, broad range, okay? It's bigger than just like the word automobile is a fancy word for it, but car, okay? Neurotypical aligns most with societal expectations. So neurotypical means we're following the regular norming cycle. We're matching up to what has been the going acceptance of normal. Okay. And so in the past, we've had language that has been different. The word for neurotypical would have been the word normal. Okay. The normal brain or the average brain. So the correct word for that to be used is neurotypical. Okay. The neurodivergent is the one that differs from societal expectations. And so we'll dive a little bit more into neurodivergent, but that's the one that's very, different for the definitions, and we'll spend more time on that today than any of the others. And then neuroaffirming means you are supporting the identity, needs, and strengths of all neurodiverse brains. So all neurodiversity is being supported through their identity, needs, and strengths, but especially understanding those that are neurodivergent. Okay. All right. So let's talk about some perception of neurodiversity and look at that natural variation that happens across. So, neurodiversity means that there is variation in the way that we think, learn, our attention, and our behavior, but it's within what's accepted or the normal range. So, we can accept that this person who sits across the desk from us has a little bit different perspective, but the behavior, the attention, the thinking process is okay. It's still what we consider normal. It doesn't have a different process. And so we feel like that's an okay thing. We accept it. Okay. We understand in neurodiversity that there's some natural variation and that different brains process information differently, but we don't ostracize or leave them out because they are so different we don't know how to accept it. And this is in the neurodiversity natural variation. When the environment doesn't fit, this is where the stress and the struggle increase. Okay. And so this is where we're going to spend most of our time today is moving into the perception check of understanding difference versus deficit. Okay. So a deficit lens is we look at someone in the workplace or in our situation, we say, what is wrong with them? Why can't they do this the way that we do? Okay. We look at it as it being broken, something that needs to be fixed, rather than it being something that is simply different, okay, in the way that we learn, in the way that we process. And so the difference lens, shifting our difference lens, sort of like choosing a different glasses, it's what's different and what helps. So instead of looking at it as a brokenness, we look at it as something we embrace that this is a different perspective and we need to see what is helping that person in order for them to thrive in a certain environment. Okay. It's the same learner, it's just two different support plans of how we look at it. So when we see that, it can help. I met with some people recently, adults who are struggling in the environment of their work situation because their boss or immediate supervisor looks at them as something's wrong with them rather than something that's different with them. And that starts pushing that problem onto the person rather than onto the environment. So we want to embrace that as an opportunity for us to change our perspective. A lot of people, when they're in this particular place of a perception check, they have an automatic set to their back. They automatically get a little bit offended because they're like, so now I have to change the way I think because they don't function right. Well, the truth is, there's not a right or a wrong. There is simply a difference. And that's what we need to look at as saying, this is no longer a black and white world, but a gray world where things are in shades. This is not monochromatic. This is where there are different opportunities. And a more colorful world is when we can embrace that same person, that same learner, that same worker, but in a different support mindset. Okay. So I want you to be realistic for yourself for just a minute. And I want you to take about 10 seconds and think about your perception. Are you operating in a deficit lens? Are you operating in a different lens? And what is it going to take for you to change? Because I'm hoping that today you can begin to embrace the difference lens and learn so much. So let's talk about first the language of neurodivergence, okay? The language of neurodivergence starts with the neurodiversity that we've talked about a little bit. It talks to the full range of human brains, and it includes both neurotypical and neurodivergent brains, all brains, okay? It is a variation, not a hierarchy. So in other words, the quote unquote neurotypical brain, normal brain is not higher or more specialized or better than the neurodivergent brain. The neurodivergent brain is just as valued, it's just as special in neurodiversity as the neurotypical brain. It's just simply a language system that's different. Okay. So we're looking at variation, not hierarchy. A neurotypical brain has neurological development that aligns with normative expectations, and the systems that we have are usually built for this profile. This is the systems that we have in our school and our workplace now are usually built for this profile, where we can have 20 kids in a classroom who are all performing in the same way and they all sit in their desk and they all do what they're supposed to. When our workers are people who can come into the workplace and they can do what's asked of them without any accommodations or changes or adaptations. And this is typically what we have been functioning in for many, many years. The challenges still happen, just they're not typically not from mismatch. In other words, they're not in the wrong setting or environment. Okay. I'm going to address that a little more in the CAR acronym so you can understand that and where you can feel what that is in a little bit. Okay. Now we're going to talk about neurodivergent. Neurodivergent people, neurodivergent brains function different from the majority. Okay. That is shifting over time, but right now, this labeling includes autism, ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette, sensory processing differences such as synesthesia, and more. Okay. This commonly includes mental health conditions also, like anxiety, OCD, ODD. So lots of different diagnoses. So if the brain and the person struggle to function in the quote unquote normal setting, normal environment, and need some difference, then that's where we see the neurodivergence. That means it's not aligning to the neurotypical pathway that we are familiar with. Okay. Neuroaffirming means that we're going to respect the identity and reduce the stigma. So when we start looking at data in a little bit, we're going to understand that neuroaffirming means that we're going to embrace the differences as being a part of the benefit instead of a part of a deficit. We're going to start opening our mind or our perception to understand that we can gain from the neurodivergent brain probably in a much stronger way if we embrace it with neuroaffirming language and embrace that learning experience. The big thing is in the neuroaffirming perspective and of lens, we balance strength and we support needs. Okay. We don't look at the person or the brain as broken, needing fixing, but we really look at it as needing support, some support to manage that environment. Okay. So I'm going to come back for just a minute as we talk about the neurodiversity, and I'm going to go back and talk to the cars that we put in our chat. So a lot of cars that we put in our chat, I did not see anyone list that you were driving a Lamborghini. I did not see anyone list in there that you were driving a race car. I did not even, when the time that I scrolled, I did not even see anyone that said that they were driving a Tesla at that time. They may have after I was not looking at the chat anymore. But these are all different cars. They function completely different. My father drives a Tesla, and it's a newer thing for him that he's gotten. And that frustrates me sometimes because when we're going to go somewhere together, I can get gas and I can go, but he has to stop and charge his car. And sometimes that means I have to interrupt my path because I have to stop and wait on him to charge his car. I hope you're grasping what I'm saying here. He chose a different vehicle, and that means that it has changed the way that I have to take my path on the journey because of his choice, because of his difference. Okay. Sometimes this is what we see in the workplace and the learning experience is that we have different cars, we have different choices that we've made, and that can change the way the experience of what we're doing in the workplace or the learning environment is affected. Okay. So when we look at neurodiversity and we say this is the individual differences and they cannot or should not be stigmatized, we have to shift our lens to the support and inclusion, and it has to be deliberate. There has to be deliberate support and inclusion there, from our language to the systems that we put in place, because the individual differences in brain functioning are normal variations. Neurodivergent brains who learn a little different, have to charge a little more often, have to change things up a little bit, should not be stigmatized, because they can greatly benefit the creativity and innovation in the workplace if we give them the right support and inclusion. In fact, let's talk about statistics a little bit, because this is going to be a really important shift for us. We're going to move from a medical model of labeling, which is deficit focused, what's wrong with you, what needs to change, into more of a social model, which is difference focused, and it means what's needed. So the difference in the two models is really about support and accessing improvement outcomes. Okay, so we want them to be able to access and to improve their overall experience and boost their efficiency cycle in our workplace without there being a constant drag in our workplace and in our environment. Okay. As a lot of you are social workers or a lot of you are nurses and educators, you will come across people who have different ways of presenting themselves, different communication methods, different perceptual methods, and sometimes it can be challenging. But if we shift our mindset from labeling into what is needed instead of what's wrong, how do we support, it can change the way that we embrace the brain and inspire the innovation that we want to see in our workplace. And who doesn't want to see things get better in our workplace? Okay. All right. As we talk about the neurotypical profile and shift from looking at that neurotypical profile, the neurotypical characteristics, so that you know what I'm talking about, are where the developmental milestones occur on the regular timeline. The routine changes are a little flexible, the social cues and communication norms are intuitive, and the information processing aligns in the majority of systems. So if you present to that person, they're able to pick it up and put it back, okay? If you are giving them a social cue through your hand and eye coordination, if you're giving them the smiles, they're interpreting your normal body language. They're able to read the routine changes that you say. They adjust with general flexibility. This is what we call neurotypical, because this is what we are used to in our normative cycle, okay? When we shift from the neurotypical and we look at the neurodivergent profiles, we move to there are differences. And in the past, we moved this into, okay, well, this is a brokenness. A neurodivergent is a brokenness. And again, we want to move out of that mindset to an embracing mindset, because this population is on the rise, okay? Most people, when they look at me, they think that I am a quote unquote normal person. Okay. That's their perception, is I am a normal person. They don't see a lot of differences about me. But in fact, I am very neurodivergent. Some of the other franchisees in the system tease me that I actually am a clone and there's multiples of me, because I'm able to do things in a different way that's more efficient in my process. The reason why we do that is because I function differently than a lot of other people, but no one has ever labeled me as being broken or wrong. They simply laugh at the things that I'm able to do in a different way without realizing that. We've all had those experiences. We've all had the experiences of being ostracized in a little way, or picked out, or put in a different box. Okay. I struggled when I was growing up with mathematical processes, and the label for that at the time is called dyscalculia. Okay, so dyscalculia is simply a brokenness in the math cycle. And so math for me was a nightmare. And I thought I would never learn math. I would never be able to do math. And so I avoided everything that there was to do with math because that was a trial for me. I embraced reading and writing. I loved reading and writing because that was something that I thrived in. So I tended to my strength cycle and avoided my weakness cycle because that was the path of least resistance. I could just avoid that and then I wouldn't get in trouble. And that was what we wanted to stay out of. The reality is about 1 in 5 people are considered neurodivergent. This has grown since 2020 to now, even though the data has not physically changed on all the stats, most clinicians, people in the workplace, people in education know this is closer to a 2 in 5 now. So if we look at that, that's about 40% of our population. So somewhere in between 35 and 40% of our population are neurodivergent, meaning that they think differently and they process information differently than the neurotypical brain. Neurodivergent is not a medical term. It is a societal term, okay? It is about increased awareness. It's diagnosis driven and it has more visibility. The places it's showing up most is in processing, sensory experiences, and social interaction. We understand a lot of it, processing when people don't pick up the information as quickly as it's being delivered or in a different way it's being delivered. Sensory experiences, we see more of this where we're becoming aware of people who have different sensory experiences in taste, in texture, in the way that their clothing fits or touches them, and the way that impact some things like synesthesia. I have a hard time myself going to a movie theater because I have a little synesthesia associated with the smell of popcorn. And so popcorn to me smells like urine. And so if I go to uh, it feels like I'm sitting in a bathroom the whole time when I go to a theater. So it's not a great experience. It's not something I would want to embrace. Does that make me a broken person? It does not. Instead, what it does is it makes me try to cope with that, or I can retrain my brain and help myself understand what's happening in my brain where I can embrace that. And that's the cycle we want to get into. Okay. So we want to make sure that neurodivergence is embraced in a great way. So here are the characteristics that we want to look at. The development may follow a different timeline. This is typical when we're looking at children in the clinical setting. This is typical when we see sometimes workers coming in, maybe a student nurse or someone who's coming in, and the way that they're taking in information is very different. They're a little slower to take that information in, or they need more support when taking that information in. A predictable routine may feel very, very necessary because those are like guardrails. Okay. So, again, we're going to get back to our car for a minute and think about our roads. Okay. So, we have a race car and we have a race car brain. And in certain settings, we race around the racetrack and we're super happy with racing around the racetrack. But all of a sudden, our race car now is moved onto a different roadway. When we're moved into this different roadway, now our tires spin out and we end out in the ditch because we have no tread on our tires. This is important to realize that many learners, children, people in the workplace are going to struggle with their race car brain that's zipping around the track in their creativity section. But then when they're put into an academic track, then their developments may look very different and their routine may need guardrails so that they don't spin out and end up in a ditch. Their social cues that they are picking up from other people can be interpreted differently because their tread is different. They don't understand all of the social cues. And in reality, I'm going to put this to what I think most of us probably are. as adults on this webinar. Most of us probably use different language than teenagers use right now in chats and in texting because we don't know. I understand if I say 6, 7 because I work with children all the time that I'm going to get a giggle or a reaction because that is the thing right now. There is a reaction. Now, what does 6, 7 mean? Well, it just depends on who you're talking to because 6, 7 can have a negative connotation or hilarious connotation depending on what the child actually knows or the person actually knows about that. Now, most of you are looking at me and are thinking, like, I have no idea what you're talking about at 6, 7. Is that like 67 or that's just a number, a 6 and then a 7? Well, true. That's all we thought it was for a long, long time. But now that has a different meaning. Okay. So social cues change day to day. Fads, social media, and things have changed that. And so that can affect the processing of information. And some people may not adapt as quickly to the changing world as we do. Some people may not understand how the language systems are changing or the body language is changing, or not even be able to adjust and adapt as quickly because they struggle with what we call cognitive flexibility. And so these are the areas where we are wanting to give them the support. Let's talk about some contributors to neurodivergence so that we can understand where this is coming from and so we can have a good understanding of what we want to do there. So first, the first contributor that is very common is family history. Family history can be a big contributor to a lot of neurodivergence, especially that we know for like attention issues and dyslexia, dyscalculia, those types of things can run very heavily in families, or traits can run in families. The heritability estimates for ADHD are super high in research literature, as they are for all of the dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and those associated label disorders. So when we look at that environment of being the first one being genetic as a possibility, the second one is even bigger in our world, and this is environment. Okay. There's a lot of debate about environmental impact on our genetics. There is a lot of debate about environmental impact on our brains and how it's impacting us. Everything from cell phones to vaccinations to how much plastic we have or how much nutrition we have, all of these things. But there are some things that we know that are actual data-driven proof. We do know that prenatal exposures and early stress can influence development. We all know that. We accept that. It's something that's been there, and the data is supporting that when you are prenatally exposed to things, drugs, stress, abuse, and things like that, that can influence the development of the person in vitro and in the early age of their environment. Okay. We also understand the affect of toxins and chronic stress and malnutrition because this actually affects key networks in the brain and how the brain wires and how the brain gets the data and information that it needs to create, we're going to call it the roadway of where all of the information is going, where the information flow in the triage of the brain. Then we can also probably all agree about the shape. Attachment quality and adversity can shape regulation and learning. And attachment quality and adversity can happen from a lot of different environments. It can happen because there is a child who's moved into foster care or moved out of foster care. It can happen in adoption situations. It can happen in a lot of different ways. And sometimes it can happen even in the quote unquote normal home environment where the situation of attachment and adversity is causing some regulation and learning issues. The third contributor is actually the brain structure and the neurobiology. So there are differences in the brain regions, and in the neurodiverse brain, you can actually see on a functional MRI the difference in the brain regions and the connectivity. A lot of researchers have been doing a lot of different data now that we have more access to scans and EEGs and things that we can look at the brain. So it helps us to be able to see how connectivity can be driven differently. In fact, some of the latest research is showing us that we can actually look at a functional MRI of the brain as early as age 4 to determine if a child has dyslexia or other learning differences, even from the blood flow areas of the brain and the activity of the brain of language systems and how they're stimulated. So the differences in brains can often relate to their social connections, their sensory connections, and very, very often in the executive function circuits. The executive function circuits are where you're going to see a lot of the attention issues and the autism issues. Okay. So neurobiology is helping to explain why some tasks are taking more effort than others and how the brain is actually learning enormously differently in the neurodiverse brain than in neurotypical brain. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a second. I did see a couple of things pop up in the chat. Miss Chanel, is there anything I need to address so far?
No, ma'am. They just say, they were talking about the 6-7.
Yeah, 6-7 is definitely one of those ongoing things. So we can certainly address that later if we need to. All right, let's dive into the next section, which is common challenge areas, because this is where we're going to spend a lot of time talking about them and talking about some possibilities that we can help in common challenge areas, both in the work environment with children and adults that we see in our practices, and also how we can change our perception of it being a brokenness to how can we support it. So first, my passionate area is in the learning and executive processing. So learning and executive processing impacts us throughout our lifetime. And a lot of people think that it only impacts us from the time, we're in school. But the reality is the learning brain is the always brain. You are always learning. And as long as you are learning, then you are alive. When you are no longer learning, you are no longer with us. Learning processes are really important from the beginning all the way through, and they involve 4 key areas that we look at. One is planning and organizing time management. So this is the frontal lobe part of your brain, the planning and organizing, and your time management area. And this is an area of big frustration, probably one of the biggest areas of frustration for a lot of people in the workplace is that they find people cannot be on time or they're going over in environment. Time management has become more challenging because of the dependence on technology. So a lot of people have not trained their brain for good time management because they've become reliant on technology to manage that for them, where someone is constantly telling them what to do, an alarm is going off, they have a schedule, they have some kind of warning system set up on their phone, and that they quit organizing or keeping that information in their brain. And so their brain has become lazy in the planning processes. Or it has become untrained more than just being lazy. So a lot of times we are not spending the time that it takes to actually stop and plan our day, organize our time, and look at the time management so that we can get to a certain place or be at a certain place in the time frame that we need to. So this is an area that we will need to give lots of support for those who are struggling in this area. And that can be tools such as calendars and planners. I remember as a teacher for many years, that was the go-to thing. I'm going to age myself, but for many of the students that I was teaching, we didn't have cell phones in the classroom. So we had these planners. Every child had a planner, and they were supposed to write the homework from the board onto the planner. But the reality is probably maybe 10% of the kids did that, right? And then the ones that would go home and they would have no idea what the homework was, then I would get requested by the administration or by the parents. Well, the child has to write the information down and then bring it to you, and you have to sign it that it's correct. Boy, was that frustrating to me. It was the support system for me to make sure that they had the information written down. But it was so frustrating to me because I was like, man, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to, stop what I'm doing and go and do this. And at that point in time, I wasn't in a support mindset. I was in a mindset of this child needs to be able to do it. They need to learn how to do this on their own. This needs to be an experience that they need to do because I had not shifted yet from that what's wrong with you mindset into a mindset of giving the support systems that they needed. Okay. When I did make that shift, it made my classroom much more efficient. And so understanding when someone is having trouble with planning and organizing and time management and putting the supports in place that they will need, you can change that perspective instead of constantly being irritated or frustrated with them. You're giving them the tools that they need to do that or training them in that methodology so that they learn how to do that. Most of us make assumptions that kids are trained to plan, organize, and have time management at their home cycle or in the school environment. And most of the time, that is not happening. And so there is a deficit that can happen that is not related to any type of labeling disorder. It's simply a lack of training. And so this is something that can be trained in the brain. Even if a child does have a deficit, such as attention issues, that are executive function issues that affect this is still a skill that can be trained, whether they're a young adult or a worker. This is a skill that can be trained with the right support or guardrails. Okay. The second area here in learning and executive function is starting task and sustaining attention. This starting task can be something that requires a timer. It can be as far as a support, and sustaining attention could require someone with a reminder, memo, or note that can help them be able to stay on task. I remember walking around in a classroom and having to tap a desk to pull them back to attention, or having to put an egg timer on a desk to help them to start task. So when they're in the workplace, many times they look at the elephant of the experience and they're like, I don't know where to start. So if they're giving the initial start task or have it broke up into chunks, then they're able to do that more efficiently. Okay. If there is a deficit in that area, such as a nutritional deficit, or their brain actually has an ADHD label or some type of attentional issue that is not currently being medicated, they may need some direction and help in getting the right minerals, the right supplements that they need to support their brain in being able to sustain attention. For example, about 80% of our workforce nowadays are dehydrated, and a dehydrated brain cannot sustain attention. Again, when we have a neurodiverse brain, neurodivergent brain, that many times means that we could have a gene mutation or we could have something that requires a different type of fuel. Let's go back to the race car for a minute. We would never put a regular unleaded fuel into a race car because a race car needs a higher octane fuel. So if we need a different type of fuel for the race car, we can understand that we need a different type of fuel for certain brains. So certain brains may require to have more electrolytes. They may be required to have more of certain minerals like a magnesium because they're deficient in that area. So it would be very important for us to look at those things and to help them, support them in getting those tools that they need for their toolbox in order to support them in sustaining attention and task start. Okay. This also falls into following multiple step directions because many times students and workers and learners of all ages struggle with following multi-step directions because they have a weak working memory. The weak working memory is becoming more prevalent because we are not using our working memory as much as we used to as we become technologically dependent, I guess is the best word. we are using technology to be our coping skill. And so we're not training our brain to actually hold on to those things in memory. So we put it all in our phone, and then our brain gets weaker and weaker at following multi-step directions. So training that skill and helping them to do that and grow that multi-step directional skill is something that could be urgent and supportive. In the short term, giving them the tools such as a checklist that they can check off. If it is a repetitive task that should be habitual by now, you could do this through pictorial representations, giving them a checklist where they can easily see it. Some people are very auditory and they need you to tell them that in an auditory instruction. Some people are very visual. They need those visual imageries. So learning that in your workplace of those who learned in those different ways can be super powerful. One of the most frustrating in a clinical setting, and I tease my husband that this is his deficit all the time, is keeping track of materials. Sometimes I swear that men can look at something and it's right there in front of them and they cannot see it. This morning it was light bulbs. And literally I opened the cabinet and they were right there. And he couldn't find them. This is something we laugh about the male brain, but the male brain actually sees things differently than the female brain many times. And so we look for details and they look at the full picture. And so if there's too much right there, they get overwhelmed and their brain actually cannot see what is right in front of them. And that's because most male brains are visually wired. So that might help you in your workplace if you're getting frustrated with the doctor or principal or coworker who literally keeps losing their materials and it's right in front of them. Just understand that their brain may have trouble keeping track of materials. Okay. Again, this could be a system that you put in place of like we do with our keys. We hang our keys in the same place every time. We know where our keys are. Okay. We have a little joke here in our center. We have a brain trainer who every time she comes and she has leftovers from her lunch, she goes and puts her keys on top of her lunch in the refrigerator because she can't go anywhere without her keys. And if they're on top of her leftover lunch, she goes to get her keys, she'll see her leftover lunch. And that's how she has learned that skill for herself. It's a coping skill. All right, let's talk about sensory processing, okay? In sensory processing, which we are seeing more and more of nowadays, there is over or under reactivity to noise, light, touch, and textures. And I'm going to add something here. It's not just texture. Sometimes it's over reactivity or under reactivity to smells. And I failed to put that in there. So sometimes the smells can also be there. So typically, what we see most of is a noise environment where people have an overstimulation or understimulation to noise. I can't think, there's too much noise. I cannot function in this workplace because it's giving me sensory overload. I'm getting too much stimulus. I need to be in a quiet room to be able to do this. There's too much demand for me. Some children typically try to compensate with movement or fidgets in order to regulate. I don't know if this is showing, but if you can see my ring here is a fidget ring. This is one that I actually use for that purpose because I can sit here and spin my ring without it being annoying to anyone else. But this fidget ring actually helps regulate when you're overstimulated. So you can shut that down. So there's all kinds of tools now that are not obtrusive. Now I'm going to show you one that's like, this is at the end of a pencil. That's a spinner. I find that most of my attention-driven kids, they can sit here and spin this pencil repetitively, and then they will lose all attention and have the inability to do anything else because what they were doing when provided with the fidget now just becomes this. If a child is having sensory overload, this can calm them. But if you give this to a child or a worker who has an attention issue, they suddenly went from doing the task that they were supposed to do to now messing with the pencil or pen because that's more exciting. It's less stimulus for them. So I think that choosing the right tools to help with the sensory processing delay is the most important thing. Let's talk about the workplace for just a minute, and then we'll come back to classroom. In the workplace, I think it's very important at a staff meeting, in a setting. You could possibly even do it through an email or something like that. I think it's important that we ask these questions. Are there things that overstimulate you or understimulate you? Does noise bother you? Do lights bother you? Are there certain touches or textures that bother you? I have an employee who does not want to be touched. And her definition of hell on earth is if someone tries to hug her. So when you have another person in the environment who wants to shake hands when they meet somebody, or they want to touch, hug, embrace, high five, those types of things, that to her is the definition of uncomfortable experiences. Okay. That does not make her less capable. It simply is an adaptation that is an overstimulation for her, a sensory overload that distresses her. And so we adapt to that and understand that we do not do that to this particular person because it's going to make her situation at work uncomfortable. And so we have an understanding of that. There are some tools that help with this. One is the languages of workplace appreciation. It's a super easy tool to use. It's a great book if you're familiar with the book. It is allows you to send a code out to someone, and they can simply fill in a quiz, and you can find out a lot about how they feel appreciated and what really bothers them simply by answering a few questions. If you're familiar with the Love Languages series, it comes from the same author. But that is a great tool. It's one that we use here for our workplace because it helps us understand how our workers feel appreciated and rewarded, and how they feel punished or unappreciated when they do not get the things that they need, or they get overloaded with things they don't want, such as, touch for someone who does not enjoy that experience. Okay. All right. I'm going to pause there for a second. Miss Chanel, any questions in that area?
No questions, just comments on the things that you were talking about. Wait a minute, there is one question that just came in. It says, what's the name of the book?
It is the Languages of Workplace Appreciation.
All right. And then Miss Tamika in the chat, she said,
All right, so we're going to move on to the next one, which is social and communication skills. Okay, this is probably the area where most misunderstandings happen, and it's in our language systems because we do not realize how our language can change perception and what we feel and what another person feels. Okay, so interpreting social cues and unspoken rules, something that the neurotypical brain generally has an okay time doing. Okay, generally. Um, I can tell you in the world that we live in right now, especially with social media and texting and emailing, this has changed in a lot of ways. Language has changed because how many of you realize that if you put an exclamation mark after anything you're saying in a text or an email, that is considered yelling? I had no idea. I am just an effusive person, so I love exclamation marks. And I thought exclamation marks just meant important, important. Okay. Yay, I'm excited for you. Instead, in texting and in emails, an exclamation mark means I'm yelling at you. So understanding social cues and unspoken rules can be challenging because I had no idea that the exclamation mark had changed places, that it no longer meant excitement, and instead it meant that I was yelling at you. Reciprocal conversation for people in social and communication mirage can be very, very hard. So, in other words, they look at what is being said or what they are perceiving as being said, and they have to process that through a different lens, or they have to stop that processing. So, the ongoing conversation or reciprocal conversation is difficult for them and may take a little bit longer. What we see tends to happen is a boss, a coworker says something to someone else. The other person doesn't respond in perceived time frame that the first person wants, person A wants. So person A interprets either A, that person is angry at me, they're refusing to answer me, they're mean. That you start putting emotions to the response time or the reciprocal conversation time when person B is still just trying to process and carefully respond to that language. So this is an area that we all need to take a pause, okay? And taking a pause there can be huge in understanding that people process language differently, both written and verbal language. And so we need to take a pause and allow people to have the opportunity to process that language and respond to us rather than just writing over them or running over them in that language and continuing to do that. I am a very verbal person. And in my verbosity, sometimes I tend to run over people. So this is an area that I know I have to work on because misunderstandings in this area can lead to isolation. It can lead to a person who feels like they're not being heard. It can lead to a person who feels like they are being ignored or misinterpreted constantly, or it's a hostile work environment. And this is really important that we take the time to have the conversation, social and communication skills. Again, the workplace, the language of workplace appreciation can help you in this, but it's also something that can be as simple as having a conversation in your staff and saying, I went to a workshop and I learned that reciprocal conversations can lead to misunderstandings a lot more prevalently now than it used to. And that sometimes what we use in text and email, we think is okay to say, and the other person interprets it in a different way because their lexical access or connotation of a certain word is different than our perception. So if you share that in a staff or a coworker situation, you can open up a language system or communication system that says it's okay if you tell me I just need more time to process what you're saying. It's okay if I move too fast for you. I realize I'm way more verbal in my language and I overtalk you. Or the same way, if you are the person who actually needs a little bit more time, it's okay for you to take ownership of that and say, I need a little more time to process. You're moving a little too quickly for me to process your language. Okay. Any questions on social and communication?
No, ma'am.
All right. Y'all are doing good. I'm so proud of y'all. We're going to move into emotional regulation, okay? Emotional regulation in the workplace has become really volatile lately and in the classroom. In fact, my daughter-in-law is a teacher now, and we were just talking about this, how difficult it is for a lot of people to learn emotional regulation. It's simply because they go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, because their amygdala is out of order and they are not taught how to handle their own emotions. They are not taught to embrace their own emotions and to let them sit, to breathe through them. So, a lot of times we see people who at work or at school are trying to cope in their neurodivergent brain with the neurotypical environment. And then they come home and it is explosive. at home. They come home and they're screaming, yelling, crying, having complete meltdowns. And we're like, oh my word, this person is crazy. Okay. Well, the reality is at home, they don't feel safe and they've been in a straight jacket all day long. They've been in a hard situation all day long where they're just trying to hold it all in, hold it all on the line. Sort of like, let's go back to our car. It's raining outside, it's storming outside, and we're in the car and we're trying to see. We can't see. It's just real torrential, and we're driving slow and trying to stay in the lane. And we've got tension all in our body all day long. And then when we finally get home, we go, ah, and it just kind of releases on us. Okay. That is the same thing with the big emotional reactions that you get. A lot of times it's hard to understand that when you get big emotional reactions, that is not necessarily a bad thing. That actually is probably a good thing because even though it doesn't feel good, it means that that person that's giving you that big emotional reaction is considering you safe. They're considering you a safe place to have that big emotional reaction. And so you can embrace that as saying, oh, that's a form of love, or that's a form of appreciation for me that they're going to give me this big emotional reaction. I know your brain's like, oh, no, I don't want that. Thank you very much. But if you are the safe place, that person is letting you know that they're having difficulty calming down. And so that big emotional reaction means that they need your help to learn how to do that. Okay. So I'm going to give you a few tips for this that can be really beneficial and they're super easy to do. This can be when the impulsivity is overwhelming them, when anger is overwhelming them, when they are in their amygdala. Okay. So amygdala is our emotional center of our brain. So, ways to get out of the amygdala and into logic vary. A calming thing can be so simple. It's you can take your hands and you can put here on your chest with a firm press, and that's on your vagus nerve, and that can help. You can come up here right on your edge here, and you can actually push right here. And this can be a calming mechanism. Okay. Sometimes that's a good experience for them. I do not suggest you do this to the person unless they absolutely cannot. You will know, like on a child who struggles with autism or something, a firm hug that actually helps them feel back in control. It's a guardrail experience for them. Sometimes a firm hand on their shoulder can be a guardrail experience for them because it stops that overstimulation to the brain or the full on dumping of those hormones into the brain. So I don't suggest you put hands on people to do this unless they are unable to do it for themselves and they are a child that you're responsible for. Other than that, I suggest you take the time when they're not having big emotional reactions and you show them these calming mechanisms, okay? Another one I often teach my students is take your ring finger, and where your ring finger meets your hand, palm of your hand, you can push right here and hold for 5 seconds. And it has the same reaction in your brain as if you just got a milligram of Ritalin or some type of ADD medicine. It just slows down that impulse to the brain, okay? Changes that little stimulus right there. And you can read more about this, but learning the calming mechanisms. Deep breathing is something that a lot of people have used in the past with counting, where they're saying, I want you to count. But when you say you need to count to 10, most of them can't think to count to 10 because they are not in that part of their brain, which is the logic. They're still in emotions. So you have to count for them. So you'll go, let's breathe and count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's breathe in. Hold it. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you're modeling it and doing that very often, that will help. Okay. Again, a suggestion is that you do this prior to the experience. Okay. So you say, these are some tools, these are some tips that you can do. If you have this happening constantly in a classroom, in a work environment, in a situation like that, you might want to actually put a poster up that shows these are some things that you can do when you're having a moment. I remember in our classroom that we actually had a place in the room we called the calming place, okay? And it just had a big poster over there, and they could walk over and read through those things on the poster. And they had pictures for those who, right at that moment, couldn't read, the pictures that would help them count through and be able to breathe. So this is something that you can do to help them calm down in escalation, maybe in your staff area, if you're in a working area, or if this is a tool you can give to parents that you work with, if you're in the social, or if you are a nurse who's maybe on a floor, you can even put it on as a little place on a clipboard. You walk around with a clipboard sometimes. You can put it on there just like a little laminated reminder, okay? So that can help with that emotional regulation, okay? If there's a lot of pain and the fight or flight has gotten too extreme, to throw someone into the logic tree really quickly, they can actually count forward and say their alphabet. So 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D, 5E. You'll have to think when you do that. And so it throws you into frontal lobe, which is your logic tree instead of your amygdala. Okay. All right. I could spend a lot of time there, but we have a lot of content. So if you want more information there, that's something that you can email me. We can do a future workshop on emotional regulation. And then I will go. Any questions there, Miss Chanel?
No questions, just thanking you so much for the techniques.
Good, great. All right. Let's move into behavioral and mental health. So right now we have more higher rates of anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem reported in the workplace environment and in the school environment than ever before. The stress of our environment is not designed for needs with increased risk. And so we have to give tips and tools to people, because if we don't, then we're going to have trouble with transitions and have unexpected events that can trigger anxiety. I'm going to share an example with you. I had a client just call the other day, and this person just called, and I was asking some questions, and the pacing of the questions that I was asking overwhelmed her auditory. And so she literally started having an anxiety attack on the phone. I had to implement the previous techniques that we were just talking about with this person on the phone, because I triggered her anxiety just by asking too many questions in a short pace of time, and it overstimulated her. So I want you to be aware that transitions and unexpected events can trigger anxiety. So when you know that a transition is coming, or you know an unexpected event is likely to happen, then you can warn the person in advance. If you know that they're prone to anxiety or trigger moments, then you can give them the heads up, and you can give them a tip or a tool and say, look, I don't really know what to expect. We're headed to this place or this environment. We're going to be working with this particular client, and I don't really know what to expect in this particular situation. So we may have some things that are going to make you have a little bit of panic. So let's talk about what we can do if you start feeling that. Okay. And so those are the things that you can do. Simple things to do that are not obtrusive can be as easy as rubbing the eyebrow. So rubbing the eyebrow is not, and that can be done like this, where you're doing it in your hand. Okay. And so that can actually calm someone. Behind the ear, this is something you may find right behind the ear is a point, and you can rub if you're feeling a lot of stress or anxiety from transitioning or unexpected events. This can be an area that will push blood flow to the brain and reduce anxiety. Okay, so this is an area that you can work for. I am not a behavioral and mental health specialist. I only learned these from dealing with lots of children and adults over my time. And as a board certified cognitive specialist, I've learned what helps with cognition. But if you want to know more about behavioral and mental health coping skills, I can refer you to some people who are very well versed in this. If you are wanting to refer, some good tools or materials, depending on a certain diagnosis or a wide range. Having the conversations in advance is really advantageous. And one book I would recommend is one by Clint Davis called Building Better Bridges. That is one about having the hard conversations before the situation occurs. That one is particularly aimed at having the conversation with children, in particular, about, various situations. But that is a critical piece is preparation and being prepared in advance. Any questions there?
No questions.
The next part's going to be a little bit bigger just because the pacing and we still have a lot to cover. So we're going to talk about triggers just so that you can know what triggers are, because this is what pushes a child or a worker into overload. But to know what the triggers are, we've talked about some ways that you can bypass and help once they are into that environment. But if we can avoid the trigger, that's even better because then we don't get into that uncomfortable place. So let's talk about what triggers are and see if there's something that can be done in our environment to reduce triggers for people who are constantly having meltdowns or struggles in our areas of work or school. Okay. So the first trigger that we see is a sensory or social communication overload. And these look like loud noise, bright lights, crowded places. These are extended social demands where their bandwidth has been used up and they feel misunderstood. And what it looks like is it can look like anxiety, meltdowns, or withdrawal. Again, using the words fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Okay. So fight would be I'm screaming, I'm hollering, I'm throwing a fit. Flight would be that I'm actually just leaving the environment, running away, or even just running within myself. Freeze is a complete shutdown where they're not even looking at you anymore. And fawn is where they're just staring into like a deer in headlights. Okay. But you've heard that expression. So often when there is loud noise, you can see people covering ears or hitting heads, something like that. Sometimes you will see hoodies come up. Sometimes you will see people wrapping themselves and doing some shake. This doesn't mean that they're autistic necessarily. It does not mean that it could just be overstimulation or sensory overload. Okay. Bright lights for some people, especially those of us who have super sensitive eyes, so light fair skinned people, bright lights can be super challenging. For people who have a need for plenty of space, personal space, crowded spaces can make them have that same experience. Okay. Different people have different bandwidth to hold on to different social demands. And so if they are held over a long period of time where they can no longer hold on to their let's be cool experience, then they can have those meltdowns, or they can come close in on themselves, withdraw on themselves because they feel misunderstood in the communication environment. So, how can we do those things for social communications? One, knowing where that struggle is, and then helping them in advance to know what to do when they hit that struggle. So if that's a child or if that's an adult, is just embracing that there is some difference in the way that they function and you want to give them the tools that they need to function in that environment. Okay. So that can be super challenging for them. We see this also a lot with people who have traumatic brain injury or, some abusive background where they've had that, especially with those who have had some drug addictions, because it does affect the way that the brain wires in this area. I shared with you earlier that there are people, 2% of our population actually struggle with a rare type of synesthesia. And that type of synesthesia can actually be as simple as someone saying a word, and they actually taste that word and it makes them regurgitate. They feel like they're going to vomit just from hearing that word. Some people, it smells. They smell a certain thing and it makes them nauseous or sick and they can't be in that environment. I shared with you earlier about, popcorn and me. My husband loves to have popcorn every single night, despite that being a challenge for me. So we have to adjust for that where he tells me in advance, hey, I'm about to pop some popcorn. So I know at that point that I have something called a boom boom stick. I don't know if y'all are familiar with boom boom sticks, but they're the best if you don't, okay? Especially for people who have sensory issues with smell. A boom boom stick is something that you can do that's you just put it in your nose and inhale, and it actually gives you that smell for a sustained period of time. And it opens up the brain to that particular awareness, and it can reduce the frustration with synesthesia. So that's something easy. It can also open your sinuses if you're stopped up like I was this morning. So 1 to 2% of the population struggles with synesthesia, which is an overlapping wiring in the brain of sensories. And so your sensories can be overwired, and that overstimulus can cause a lot of issues, whether that be, like I said, smell, noise, lights, crowded spaces, that can make it challenging. Okay. All right, trigger number 2 that we're going to talk about is unclear expectations. In the workplace, I find that this is very, very prevalent. In the classroom, I find that this is very prevalent. Today, I am moving at a pretty good clip, a fast pacing. Thank goodness this is being recorded for those who want to replay it and can, listen to things again. But when you're very fast paced, verbal instructions can easily overload working memory. And that can lead to a backup of information. And so the person gets way overwhelmed if they're not an auditory learner. And that can cause them to have frustration and feel like the directions are vague. It creates anxiety. So what they need is they need clear, concrete steps to reduce their stress. And those can be in writing, those can be in direction. So even as I'm talking through those things, you have a visual in front of you that's giving you what this looks like, where it can happen, and then what can be done to help reduce it. And this is important that you realize that these triggers can be very real for people and causing an enormous amount of frustration. Okay. I'm going to keep going on the triggers, and then we'll answer questions about the triggers. Okay. Trigger number 3 is disruptions to routines. We live in a world of disruptions, from everything from travel and transitioning of activities, constant interruptions from our phones. We live in a world of disruption. And people who struggle with schedule changes and struggle with transitions between activities can completely feel destabilized when things are not structured correctly. In the workplace, when you know something is going to be destabilized, it is helpful if you give them an advance warning that today may be an unusual day. There may be an unexpected schedule change today. Triggers in disruptions to routines or interest are worse when people are tired, fatigued, hungry. So you can see this especially in children. I mean, it's really easy to see that a baby's fretful and crying when they're hungry than they are, and they like, change less when they're unhappy. You don't a baby, you want to change their diaper when they're starving. You feed them and then change that diaper. It's the same type of thing for us as adults. Too many things, too many changes that are unexpected and transitions that are unexpected can destabilize us and make us feel insecure. And when we think about security as being the primary thing that we need in our environment to feel safe, safety is what we need in our environment, then helping to alleviate disruptions or prep for disruptions is going to be the biggest key. In a workplace that constantly has change, such as nurses that are in a hospital where you're having constant transition, constant schedule changes, and a lot of destabilizing things that are happening. To manage that, you need to give them tools so that they can know where they can go when they're feeling overwhelmed from that destabilization. And that can be as simple as a soft place to land, okay? Come and verbalize to me, go to the break room for a minute when you're feeling overwhelmed. Um, Take a minute for that breathing, pushing on that pulse point, pushing on your ear, all of these things that helps them. The biggest one I find for when there is a destabilization, most destabilizations actually make people feel shaky inside their core and inside their being. So their strong hug for themselves is incredibly beneficial, especially if you rub. Okay, so you all understand this actually stimulates a place of safety within you because it simulates a hug or a warm experience from someone who loves you. So you can actually just cross your arms and rub up and down your arms for a few minutes, and that can actually help with stabilization. And so that's a big key to help people who are having this trigger. Okay. Trigger number 4 is cognitive load, overload. Okay. The overload in the cognitive is when there's too many demands at once, or there's a time pressure with multitasking, or high effort task without breaks. Now, in the environment of school and workplace, we see these all the time. So again, let's go back to what we talked about before about if we can put some preventatives in place. So where these demands are manageable, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. If you start just looking at the elephant, you get completely overwhelmed with cognitive overload and you cannot handle it. So if you don't have a break and you're in a high effort task, this can be something that can be super overwhelming. Okay. One thing, I work in a time pressure, multitasking, effort task, not a lot of breaks, lots of demands. So one tool that I use that helps a lot is I use magnesium lotion. That helps because you can put it on the back of your neck and it gives you a sensory experience. Also use NeuroGum. NeuroGum is gum that has magnesium L-theanine in it. And that gum is a game changer. I don't have any sitting here right now, but it comes in a lot of different flavors. It's super easy to use, and magnesium L-theanine actually helps the brain calm. And so it's super as easy as chewing a piece of gum can help relieve cognitive overload. Okay, so that's something just get the experience of releasing some of that stress. Okay. Again, preventative is better than cure, okay? And we all know that old saying, okay? But let's have tools in place that we can use that when we have cognitive overload. We talked briefly about trigger 5, which is when someone is tired or hungry, sick, or stressed. What this trigger lowers resilience, okay, because the basic needs are feeling unmet, okay. So when I am coming down with something, when there's a pressure system, again, I'll share something personal here. I've had a lot of back surgeries. So because I had a lot of back surgeries, when pressure systems move in, I feel it in my body so much that I know that my patience level lowers. Okay. So I know I have lower resilience when I'm in pain. Okay. So I've learned to say, okay, well, this is a day where I'm going to need to take some pain meds or put in something that's going to support me with my body basics because I know that this trigger can make my situation worse. Okay. Because what happens is when you're tired, hungry, sick, or stressed, little bitty small demands feel like they're this huge. So you've heard the phrase, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Well, it feels like that when you're tired, hungry, sick, or stressed. In fact, I think people have made these different words, but like when you're hungry and you're angry, it's called hangry. We are hangry. So it means that we're so hungry that our emotions have gotten involved. Okay. So, this, when our body basics are suffering dehydration because we haven't drank enough, then our brain is hurting and we have less resilience and we can't take as much on demand because our short-term memory is suffering. So, again, these are areas where we can do something as simple as getting a drink of water, getting a snack, being able to say, how are you feeling? Are you feeling okay? And again, all the tips that I've given you about lowering the triggers. Okay. All right. And the last trigger that we're going to talk about today is masking. Okay. Masking is like the biggest trigger because it is the one that we train people to do and we should not. Okay. Masking is probably what we were all raised to do, and it's an effort to hide the differences in the way that we think and feel in order to fit in with everybody else. But it is exhausting and it's linked to because you look fine at school, but then you fall apart as soon as you get into a safe environment. So helping people understand that masking is not healthy and it's a trigger to other behaviors and problems can help them to be real and own their own neurodiversity, own their own neurodivergence, whichever it might be. We are all different. That's what neurodiversity is that we all think differently. We all power our brains differently. We all drive those different vehicles that you listed in different colors. One car may be filthy, one car may be perfect. One person may do something to their car every single day. They're cleaning it, it's their pride and joy. And the other one may see it only as a tool to get them one place or the other. This is efficiency. So when we are masking, we're trying to hide the fact that we're not getting it. It's not working for us. This is not, we're not able to cope. And I think owning it, understanding how your own brain functions and understanding that is super powering. Okay. You can get some super empowerment from being able to understand how your brain works and to quit hiding behind um, the struggle. Okay. So that's reducing triggers. The next section we have is neuroaffirming language. So before we do that one, which is going to move really quickly because our time is kind of running out, I want to see if there's any questions I need to answer on triggers. I'm going to take a sip.
All right. I don't see any questions right now, Danisa, but someone said they would really love to, they would love your resources on coping skills that you were speaking of earlier.
All right, great. There's a lot of great tools there on coping skills. I would ask you go to the Learning RX Facebook page and like our page. I'm constantly posting things like this. Um, there is so much to be learned and constantly being learned in the research about how we actually learn to love our own brain and learning to love your own brain. Even now, there are people that are learning things about how our brain can keep our physical fitness in a limitation. For example, I was observing one this morning, which was just fascinating to me, that you can increase your ability to have more movement in your body just by gargling water for a few minutes every morning. And I was fascinated by that. And I honestly wasn't sure I believed it. So I tried the experience. And so it's stretching and trying to touch the floor, trying to touch the floor. And then you get up and you gargle water and then you do that. And oh my word, it was fascinating to me that actually just by doing that, you have more stretch in your body. Okay. So there's some psychological effect in our wiring of how when we reduce the strain and stress on our bodies and we get into the understanding how our brain works, that we can do some really fabulous things. For good reading, you can read about the reticulating system, the reticular activation systems in our body, and somatics. Those are really good about helping you learn how to understand how the body interacts with the vagus nerve and how positive language can take us forward. And I love doing workshops on those types of things, but I don't have time to get into all of that today. All right, let's dive into some neuroaffirming language, okay? So, neuroaffirming language is balanced. It focuses on the strengths it says we're great at, they love to. It names needs that don't have shame. Okay. So instead of pathologizing or blaming people, we actually just support them with a skill growth. Okay. Still developing in instead of they can't do, it's more of still growing. And this is a growth mindset approach. When students come, no matter their age, to Learning RX, one of the things is that we do not allow, I can'ts. We erase that T off there because you can, you just may not do it yet. And so the power of yet is super, super amazing. If you haven't read about growth mindset and you haven't embraced the power of growth mindset, then you're really missing out. And I encourage you, Dr. Susan Dwick has done lots of studies on that. And it is fascinating, growth mindset. And what it can really do is to embrace that neuroaffirming language. And instead of labeling lack, we label efficiency. And so the cycle goes from balancing that. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. It's an identity first versus the person first language. Okay. So what the goal here is to give identity and dignity to the person. So you actually ask and align in the personal preference. There are some people who prefer autistic person, and some people prefer person with autism. There are some people who prefer I'm dyslexic, and there's other people who prefer I used to have dyslexia, or I grew up with dyslexia. I struggled with dyslexia. Have, so it's all about that language system. And many times people don't have that language because they've been masking for so long that they don't have that language system in place. So this is a place to honor identity and dignity and say exactly this. We all are neurodiverse, and neurodivergent brains learn differently. I would like to honor you by asking you, do you have a personal preference of how I address you in your learning differences or in your learning efficiencies? Okay. And so that can open up a conversation that allows them to speak truth and shuts down the trigger of masking that can lead to some of the other areas. Okay. Any other questions about identity first language before we get into some more practical supports?
No, I don't see any at this time.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to get into some practical supports real quick. This is probably where you're going to have a lot of aha moments. So this is, I hate that this is going to be quick, but hopefully you will get a lot of value from this, okay? So the support principles, and this works everywhere. It doesn't matter what environment that you're in, but this is the support principles that we want to do. So remember, I've said this all through this talk. Predictability and preparation are going to reduce stress. And the more that you make your expectations visible, You give visuals, you give models, you give examples, you give the paperwork. In this day and age of AI, there are no excuses for not making expectations visible. And there is no excuses for not having preparation. If you have a person who had a hard time following something you're doing on the computer and they just can't seem to get it, you need to go down, download Scribe, and everything you do on Scribe, you can hit start, and everything you do is then put into a document, both a video document and a written document, and you can record what you're doing, and then you can give it to that person, and then they have an example right in front of them. Okay. So, in this day and age of AI being so prevalent and so easy for us to use, we can reduce load on people before we increase demand. Okay. And that's going to be the key before we give more and more and more requirements. We need to make sure that that load is manageable for them. I want to give you a visual really quick of this so that you can understand it. Okay. So my husband is headed upstairs and I see that he has two suitcases, okay? But he's headed upstairs and he's a strong guy, right? So I was like, hey, honey, look, can you carry these up while you're going? And he says, sure. So I tucked something underneath his arm and something underneath this arm. Now he has four things, okay? He's still, ready to truck up the stairs. And then I was like, you know what? Since you're already headed upstairs, would you go ahead and put this towels up too? So I'm just going to stick this towel on your shoulder. Okay. And I think you can carry it. It's no big deal. You can. And by this point in time, he's looking at me like, are you like losing your ever loving mind? And so he starts up the stairs and I can see he's struggling under the load. So I run up the stairs real quick. I grab the towel and the two things underneath his arm. And guess what happens? He's up the stairs in no time now because I took the load from him that I had put on him by increasing the demand and I reduced the stress immediately. Okay. That obviously helped our relationship. Okay. I'm saying that as an example because sometimes we do that. We add the load or the demand for them before we reduce it by giving them the tools that they need. And so, how do you do this? You build skills first with repetition and coaching. You build relationship or connection first before you do correction. Okay. If you're writing somebody's honey about they're doing it wrong, 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 but you haven't built relationship to speak into their life, then you now have set yourself up into being an unkind person or a bad boss or someone who is not able to communicate well when it's such a simple thing as to give connection before correction. So make sure you have relationship with them and you're allowed to speak into their life before you share things. Example here, and you are attending this workshop, you chose to connect with us before I'm giving you this instruction or correction because you invited this instruction or correction. Okay. And so that's what I'm saying is you're saying, okay, you have to attend this workshop on this. You have to do this. Build that connection or that purpose behind it before you assign that load. Make sure they understand what the expectation is and give them the tools to use that. Okay. So let's get into what that looks like. For parents, home supports would be using visual routines, morning, homework, bedtime, and giving choices that preserve dignity. Okay. We need to get this done. Would you like to do this first or this first? Giving choices. Okay. Breaking task into short sprints with movement breaks. Okay. Co-regulation. We talked about co-regulation, breathing with them, counting with them. And then after they're calm, talk through the problem and solve it. But don't try to solve the problem in the middle of the meltdown. Co-regulate, then solve. Don't add to that load, okay? And then most of all, and this is what I tell my parents all the time when they come here, track the triggers, find the patterns. Is it a food? Is it a sleep issue? Is it a light issue? Is it a sensory issue? Find the trigger because if you find the pattern of the triggers, you can stop the problem before it occurs. Okay. In the classroom supports teachers. These are the best tools. Chunk your directions and repeat in multiple formats. Okay. So that can be a written format, that can be a verbal format, but make those directions in a chunkable form rather than we do not multitask. Multitasking does not exist in our brain, even though we say it does. You cannot simultaneously process. You simply task switch. You don't walk and chew gum at the same time. You simply task switch back and forth. The efficiency at which you task switch is actually what makes you look like you're doing it at the same time. Okay. So the reality is when you're giving chunks and directions and you're repeating it in multiple formats, that allows them the opportunity to pick it up and put it to where it needs to do. And that's important. It can be on the board, it can be a verbal, it can be a written, and you can chunk it into pieces. You can put it on sticky notes. You can put it on index cards where it's chunked together where they can see it. Okay. The second one I think is probably should have been first because it's most important. There's so many hidden rules, and we think that children know them, but we don't teach them, and they have to be taught explicitly because people come from different environments, and what you think people know, they may not know. I'm going to share a prime example with you. I remember very vibrantly a sweet child named Marie. She walked into my room one day and she said, Miss Walker, I still don't understand why people are going to stand around that board outside at 6 o'clock tonight. It makes no sense to me. And I looked at her and I thought, what in the world? So I walked outside and on the board it said board meeting tonight, 6 p.m. She had no idea what a board meeting was. The board that was standing out there that said board meeting tonight gave her no direction or no instructions. And she had no background knowledge or interpretation to be able to understand what that was saying. Same child, a few months later, we're talking about chocolate milk in the classroom, something that we're reading. And she says to me, does chocolate milk only come from brown cows? And I said, Marie, do you really think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows? And she said, well, of course it does. White milk comes from white cows, and chocolate milk comes from brown cows. But I was just curious about what color milk it is when the cow is a black and white cow or a red cow. Is it strawberry? This is reality, folks. 8th grade. Okay. So we make assumptions that people know exactly what we know. I still do this. Okay. I will use language that I know that my staff does not know, and I make an assumption that they know what I'm talking about. And it's because they don't have my experience, but in my own brain, I have that. So if I started talking today about saccadic fixation and the stress of the visual span and started using this type of language with you, you would gloss over and you would have no idea what I was talking about. So making sure that you teach hidden rules explicitly and purposefully can change the whole dynamics in a classroom support, okay? And in a workplace. Provide predictable transitions and warnings so that you know when something's going to happen. Okay, so we're going to have fire drill on this day. We may have a visitor that's coming in on this day. Anything that you can provide for, then you provide for. If there are going to be unexpected things, then you need to have, again, a hidden rule, an explicit hidden rule. This is how we handle unexpected. Okay. That's why we have fire drills. That's why we have, unfortunately, the shelter in place and safety rules is because we live in a world where there are unexpected. Okay. The other day we had an earthquake up here in North Louisiana, and it shook me out of my bed and terrified me. I've never experienced an earthquake before. I thought that was only something that happened in, California, and I wasn't prepared. Okay. So understanding what you can prepare for and what you can't prepare for are two different things, but you can talk through what the unexpected looks like and what you can do when you feel unprepared for the unexpected. So if you feel scared because there's a transition or unexpected thing that happened, you can come to me and tell me. You can come to this corner, which is the safety corner, and stay in the safety corner, and I will know that you're having a problem right now. Something like that. Or you can come and pick a sticky note up off my desk and put it on your desk, and I will know that you need help. It doesn't have to be this big, loud conversation, okay? Offer flexible output for kids who are struggling. This doesn't have to be ordered by a 504 or an IEP. Flexible output can give freedom to creativity and innovation. And this can be in the workplace or in the classroom, but offering this allows so much growth for the growth mindset because you can find that children with the opportunity to have flexible output will perform better. So if you're going to have a written test, but you can allow them to take it both written and orally, or maybe a brain dump in advance. So maybe they can't take it orally, but you can say, so today, before we take our test, everyone get out a sheet of paper and you can write anything that you can think of about our test before you take it. And then you can use your own cheat sheet on the test because it's your own brain cheat sheet. You just dumped the information on it right before the test. Okay. Use neutral de-escalation and repair after conflict. So when you do have escalation that happens, neutral de-escalation is going to be reducing that stress factor and then repairing it by making sure that they're okay and having that appropriate conversation to do that. Okay, running out of time, so I'm going to keep going real quick, okay? For clinicians, collaborative support translate findings that you have into daily functional supports. So this means basically, this is what this looks like. This is how you want to implement it, okay? When you're coach caregivers, you can have that assigned a mentor relationship. So when someone is struggling to find, this is who you go to, this is your coach. This is your person that you're going to go to if you need support here. This is the person you're going to go to for instruction. Kind of having those roles that they have someone who is supportive there can help build a collaborative environment instead of a you have to do this, I'm the boss environment, okay? To help target regulation and executive skills alongside the academics. That can be inside any environment, a learning environment, or a school teaching environment, a social environment, helping them understand how to target the regulation and how to manage their own executive skills can be super powerful, okay? Using strengths to drive motivation and engagement. Again, this is where that workplace appreciation can come in because if they feel relationship happening there and they feel like you care about them because maybe they're a person who needs constant support in language, but you're not someone who usually gives that, find someone in your environment who is, affirming language person and ask them to constantly be that mentor or to affirm that person or do a cheat sheet. There's things like this that you can do that are pre-made for you, that they're actually little documents that you can tear out and they have support in them. So you can, they're just little tear-offs that you can give those checklists to them for them to do or brain dumping. I keep a Sorry, I'm scrolling back and I know y'all probably can't see me, but I keep a whole set of checklists that I just got off Amazon that help, like this one day at a time, a guide to success. Okay. So super easy to use and it just helps them monitor their own inner guide or backtrack for success. These are good for adults. This is one that would be used in a child. environment or home environment. Okay. So these are all tools that are readily available. They're just checklists, daily routine checklists that can be, or if yours is particular, you can create that where they have something that can help them regulate their executive skills. Okay. And use their strengths to drive that motivation. And again, remember to use the right language, the neuro affirming language across all your systems. Don't have language that is different in your written text and your verbal text. So it may require a little training for yourself to do that. Okay. All right, I want to have time for Q&A, and I have a lot still, so I'm going to go real quick for the next 3 or 4 slides, and then we're going to get to some Q&A there at the end, okay? So in the underlying skills and learning, which I've introduced and said, sharing with you all the way through, but why they matter is because learning challenges often reflect skill gaps, not effort gaps. Dr. Stuart Avalon says it's skill, not will. So everyone wants to be liked. Everyone wants to fit in. Everyone wants to be able to perform better. But the truth is that skill gaps create what appears to be effort gaps. For example, I see a lot like with dyslexia where parents will say they're just lazy. And I say it's the myth of dyslasia because there's not such a thing of a child who doesn't want to read. It's a child who's struggling to read, so it's not fun and they don't get a picture in their brain, so they don't want to, they just can't, okay? So be deliberate about identifying these weak underlying skills, and support is the strongest thing to target that root skill. So this is what we do at Learning RX. We do assessments. Those assessments, and this is, I'm sorry, not a sales pitch, but just giving you an example. We use the Gibson test digitally and in person. The Gibson test is digitally available, and it is something that's super easy to be administered. It takes 35 minutes. It can be done in the school setting, it can be done in clinical setting, and it gives you instant results for where those cognitive weaknesses are. And then once a person understands where their cognitive weaknesses are, it can be super empowering to them because then they can understand how they can address those weaknesses. So when you're deliberate about identifying the weak underlying skills that you or another person has, and then get to the root and build that efficiency up, it's not about labeling. It's about identifying where the struggle is so that you can close the gap. Okay. So understanding that, we want to understand what IQ is and how it relates. So IQ is related to certain thinking skills, but it doesn't capture the whole picture. You can have a person who has above average IQ of 110 or higher and still be unable to read and have dyslexia. Or you can have a person who has autism and they have a 130 IQ. So an IQ doesn't capture the whole picture as a number. A learner can have strong reasoning and still need support skills because their logic can be off or their visual can be off. So understanding where the struggle is and not just looking at a number can be a game changer, okay? The second portion of this is the emotional intelligence. You can have someone who has great IQ and great academic ability, but they don't have self-awareness or emotional regulation, and that affects their attention. Or every time stress comes along, it reduces their working memory and their cognitive flexibility, and so they can't think. They literally are brilliant if they're not under stress. But if they're under stress, it completely shuts down the work cycle and they perform like they have no ability at all. So again, I'm going to stress that this is where the growth mindset supports their ability to have persistence. So teaching them what growth mindset looks like and the power of yet, you may not know this yet, but you can learn this. Let me show you the tools that you're going to need to learn this. That is what leads us to the LQ. So a learner's quotient is the IQ plus the EQ. That's what we get. So the ability to learn connects with the ability to growth, and then that ability is trained to learn by training their skills and their regulation. So you put those two together. This is your skill set that needs to be improved. This is your regulation set. This is what needs to be improved in order to get efficiency. We accept you where you are. We're going to give you the supports that you need to be where you are. But the growth cycle means you want to continue moving forward in the right cycle so that you can perform to where you need to be. If you want to look at some key takeaways here, the key takeaways that we have are that different brains are part of the normal human variation, and the supports that you provide need to be real. They can be met if you give them good support because their needs are very real. Triggers are predictable. When we track the patterns, we can know what the triggers are and we can be preventative. And if we use neuroaffirming language, that protects the dignity and improves the outcome so that we get the best results from a homeschooling clinic alignment. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share with you. This is my contact information if you wish to contact me. And I apologize that I failed to put my email on there, but it's super easy. My email is D as in my name, dot Walker, and it's at learningrx.net. Okay. All right. And let's go with some Q&As. So I put some Q&As in here. What feels most relevant to your learners? What are you seeing overload? Where are you seeing overload or shutdown? What support has helped you even a little? And what do you want to try next? Because a workshop is only a good workshop if you can implement the tools.
Thank you so much, Danisa. We are getting lots of compliments in the chat saying this is an amazing workshop. This is some great information. So I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to actually provide this useful information to us and this valuable information. So I am checking the chat, and they said any webinars you want to offer, they are here for it. So they want more webinars from you, Danisa. We're gonna see if we can get her to do some more, David. We really are. She has a very packed schedule, but the trainers are always excellent. And I'm not seeing any questions. Everyone is just saying that, they want to thank you for the information. It was great. They love the training. They love the coping mechanisms that you provide.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share, and please reach out. I am, like I said, super passionate about what I do. I love what I do. And I think that the more of us that embrace this growth mindset of neurodiversity, and we can change our world one person at a time. Just if we look at that one person and say, what if I looked at that one person who has given me problems and looked at it from their perspective just a little bit differently? I bet you can change your workplace, you can change your environment, you can change anything just by looking at them through a different lens.
Absolutely. And there is one comment that was entered in a chat that I would like to read. It says, I would like to say thank you as well. I suffer from anxiety and sometimes it gets very severe. You provided some insight and some very helpful information. Thank you.
Absolutely. I appreciate you all attending, and I hope you just are blessed by it. And I think that there are so many great tools out there nowadays. And so I want you just to go and enjoy and embrace this. And if there's anything else that I can do, please just let us know.
All right. Thank you so much. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, you will get your evaluation link. It will pop up at the end of this webinar, as well as it will be emailed out to you. So please, if you need CEs, fill out that evaluation. That is how you're going to get your CEs. Fill out that evaluation and click the appropriate CEs that you are asking for. If you would also like a certificate of attendance, it's going to be a spot on there for that as well so that we can get that to you. This webinar is being recorded. As soon as it is uploaded to our YouTube channel, I will email you guys the link along with a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. So Denisa, if you wouldn't mind emailing that to me, because I don't think I received it. I checked it earlier, but I don't think I received it. So if you would email that to me, I would definitely email it out along with the link to the recording of this webinar. So again, thank you so much for your time, Denisa. And then thanks to all of our attendees. We really appreciate you. We really appreciate you being so open, so welcoming, and the questions and comments that you guys had today to make this webinar and this RIW, as we like to call it, a success. So thank you again and enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Bye-bye.